Shout out to Blue Collar Sports TV.
Yo, what is up guys? Delboy here, aka Blue Collar Sports TV. Hopefully you guys are doing well. If you're new here, smash that like, hit subscribe, all of that good stuff. So this video is a quick preview for Jojo Diaz versus Shavkatdzon Rakhimov. Now this fight goes down on the 13th of February and it is for the IBF Super Featherweight title, which is held by Jojo Diaz. As far as I'm concerned, this is a really intriguing fight. Stylistically, this should really gel for a fun fight, and you know, in my opinion, Jojo Diaz, one of the more underrated fighters in boxing today at world level, and you've got an unknown mandatory in Rakhimov, who in my opinion is extremely dangerous. And let's be honest, somebody like Rakhimov would not get a shot if he wasn't a mandatory contender, so yeah, I'm looking forward to this one. You know, a lot of champions actually would vacate in this situation. They'd look for a bigger fight because Rakhimov, in my opinion, is extremely dangerous. He's a big puncher, but nobody knows who he is. If Jojo Diaz were to lose this fight, he's going to get critiqued, and if he wins this fight, he's not really going to get much fanfare. So to me, this is a extremely high-risk fight for Jojo Diaz and low reward. So in my opinion, he has to be commended for taking this fight. A lot of guys in this position against this sort of mandatory would vacate. So credit to Jojo Diaz for taking this one. I'm really looking forward to this fight, like I said earlier. Stylistically, this one should gel for a really intriguing fight, and it should be entertaining given how both guys can fight. And yeah, let's briefly run through the tail of the tape. We shall start with Jojo Diaz. He's got a record of 31 wins, 1 defeat, 0 draws. 15 of those 31 wins coming by way of knockout. Shavkatdzon Rakhimov has a record of 15-0. 12 of those 15 wins come by way of knockout. Jojo Diaz is listed as 5'6" with a 64-inch reach, whereas Shavkatdzon Rakhimov is listed as 5'8.5", but his reach is not listed online. So Rakhimov does have a 2.5-inch height advantage, and from what I see, it appears also he's got a longer reach. You know, Rakhimov is clearly the bigger guy in this fight. Rakhimov is a natural super featherweight, whereas Jojo Diaz has only been in the weight class for a couple of years, so Rakhimov is the naturally bigger guy, and potentially that could play a factor on fight night. Rakhimov seems to carry power in both hands, physically strong. You know, I'm certain that Jojo Diaz hasn't fought anybody as physically strong as Rakhimov, and maybe he's not fought a guy who can punch as hard as Rakhimov. Like I said, Rakhimov has power in both hands, he's a natural super featherweight, and he's very dangerous, so the size of Rakhimov could play a factor in this fight. But also, both guys are southpaws. Jojo Diaz is 28 years old, whereas Rakhimov is 26 years old. So when you look at the tail of the tape, physically, Rakhimov has the advantages. He's a bigger dude. I believe he carries more punching power. But on the flip side, Jojo Diaz does have a lot more professional experience. Having said that, for a guy of 15 fights, Rakhimov's resume is not too bad. He knocked out Robinson Castellanos in 2 rounds. Obviously, Castellanos beat Yuriorkis Gamboa. He's also knocked out Malcolm Clarkson, who is a pretty good boxer. And he's got a win over Azinga Fuzile, who's a good South African boxer. So, yeah, Rakhimov's got less pro experience than Jojo Diaz, but he's not exactly been fighting scrubs either. So, yeah, the tail of the tape certainly physically favours Rakhimov, but in terms of experience and whatnot and fighting top competition, that would go to Jojo Diaz. But enough of that, the tail of the tape is out of the way. Let's talk about the actual fight itself, what both guys should do, and eventually how I believe this fight's going to play out. But before we get into that, I have to say I find this fight extremely hard to call, and even right now, I'm not exactly sure on who I'm going to pick until the end of this video, where I'll just make a quick judgment, I guess. So it's one of those sort of fights. I see this as a 50-50 fight, similar to Joe Smith Jr. versus Maxim Vlasov. I found that prediction video very hard to make, and this is another one of those fights, which means it's a good fight as far as I'm concerned. But let's go into what each guy I believe should do, and then we'll make our final prediction. We shall start with the champion Jojo Diaz. Now, Jojo Diaz, to me, is a fighter in which is very well put together. What I mean by that, he does everything well without really excelling in one particular area. You know, he's got pretty solid defense, a nice tight guard, he can fight on the inside, he can fight at mid-range, he can box a little bit on the outside, he can counter, he can throw combinations, he can work the body. Jojo Diaz is one of those guys who can do everything to a pretty good standard from what I see. He's a well put together guy. You can tell he was a good amateur because he does all of the basics extremely well. And yeah, all around, he's a very solid fighter, in my opinion. The thing for me in regards to this fight for Jojo Diaz, you know, the difference between winning and losing will be tactic selection. I know that sounds an obvious thing to say in any fight, but especially in this fight, because when you've got a guy who can do basically everything in the ring to a pretty good standard, what you don't want to do is, you know, pick the style in which suits your opponent. So for example, in this fight, Jojo Diaz, in my opinion, would be taking a massive risk taking this to the inside or even mid-range and trading with Rakhimov. You know, we saw him do that against Tevin Farmer, and he outfought Tevin Farmer on the inside. You can do that against Tevin Farmer, but I believe that same strategy against Rakhimov is extremely risky. To me, Rakhimov is best on the inside, and he's also very effective at mid-range. When you look at Rakhimov and his knockouts, most of these come from the inside or at mid-range, when he's basically bulldozing his opponents, landing big hooks, big body shots, uppercuts, that big chopping left hand, etc. So for me, Jojo Diaz needs to take Rakhimov out of his wheelhouse. I'm not saying Rakhimov can't box from the outside, but he's nowhere near as effective. Whereas to me, Jojo Diaz is certainly a more comfortable fighter on the outside in comparison to Rakhimov. So for me, Jojo Diaz needs to be utilising that jab and those fast feet of his. You know, he needs to be pecking away with a jab, maintaining range as much as he can in this fight, and try and avoid getting into Rakhimov's wheelhouse. Of course, there's going to be moments where he needs to fight Rakhimov off. And listen, Jojo Diaz is a good inside fighter. He can throw great combinations. He can work the body. He's got nice hand speed, good combinations. Jojo Diaz can fight on the inside, and who knows? Maybe he could get the better of Rakhimov on the inside. All I'm saying is, to me, that just gives Rakhimov more of a chance. I would genuinely be surprised if Rakhimov wins this fight on the outside. So to me, Jojo Diaz needs to avoid those scenarios as much as possible, you know, just because Rakhimov is naturally the stronger dude who can hit harder, etc. So yeah, I believe Jojo Diaz needs to play the boxer in this fight, utilise those fast feet, those fast hands, be consistent with a jab, and, you know, try and keep Rakhimov constantly resetting so he can't plant his feet and land those big power shots. You know, utilise those angles, feint, use the jab, double it up, etc. He needs to keep Rakhimov guessing. He can't afford to get into one rhythm, one pace. He needs to keep changing it up to keep Rakhimov guessing. And yeah, like I said, basically avoid that inside game or the inside battle as much as possible. And also, I would like to see Jojo Diaz actually try to mount some sort of body attack in this fight. I know that's going to be risky as the smaller man with a shorter reach, but if the opportunity presents itself, I want to see Jojo Diaz change levels, work that body. Rakhimov is naturally a very aggressive guy. He brings that pressure, he can hit hard, so working that body, you know, potentially could take the steam out of Rakhimov as this fight goes long. So, you know, body work for Jojo Diaz is another key area for him in this fight. And yeah, for me, Jojo Diaz needs to play the boxer in this one. I think fighting on the inside is a lot more risky. Again, I'm not saying he can't win that fight. I'm not saying he's got no chance in that scenario. But again, against a bigger, stronger guy with more punching power, that's his wheelhouse, right? So why give him that opportunity? That's how I see it. But as for Shavkatdzon Rakhimov, how does he go about this fight? Well, obviously, like I said, he's the pressure fighter. He needs to engage Jojo Diaz into a bit of a shootout. First and foremost, if Jojo Diaz does play the boxer, one thing I need to see from Rakhimov is more of a consistent jab, because Rakhimov is very guilty of kind of walking in with no jab. He'll use a bit of head movement, he'll use a high guard, but he doesn't really feint his way in, doesn't really use a good jab. He has got a good jab, but he doesn't use it enough. He'll basically just try to walk you down with pure physicality and punching power and combinations. And he is actually kind of reckless at times when he gets there. So while that's worked so far, we have seen a couple of glimpses of chinks in his armour. For example, against Jimmy Paper, he actually got too overly aggressive in that fight, didn't pay attention to defence, and he got put down. So in this fight with Jojo Diaz against a guy who can box and move a bit, I want to see Rakhimov come behind that jab, you know, double the jab up to close the distance, maybe throw a couple of feints to draw the lead and make Jojo Diaz commit. Also, I want to see more of a defense from Rakhimov in this fight. You know, Rakhimov's a guy who, you know, naturally is not the most talented defensive fighter, doesn't have the greatest reflexes in the world, so why not pop up a high guard, you know, wear those earmuffs and come in behind the jab, try and walk Jojo Diaz down. You know, coming forwards, I think Rakhimov needs to make a couple of adjustments going into this fight, mainly his defense and the use of a jab, and when he finds his way on the inside, obviously that's when he needs to go to work. Work that body, come up the middle with uppercuts, and really try and impose your physical will on Jojo Diaz. But again, even though he's the physically stronger man, the bigger man, and the bigger puncher, he still needs to be very careful when he's at mid-range or on the inside. Because, you know, Rakhimov, in several fights I've seen him in, when he gets to those positions, he really does throw caution to the wind, and sometimes he'll kind of come in square on and really put everything into his punches. And when you're fighting a guy like Jojo Diaz, who's got faster hands, he may be able to pick punches in between your shots and get out. So, you know, Rakhimov does need to pay a lot more attention to defense in this fight, and he needs to hold his shape when he's actually throwing combinations. You know, like I said, sometimes he gets a little bit reckless, whereas Jojo Diaz, when he's trading with you, when he's throwing combinations with you, when he's punching with you, Jojo Diaz actually keeps a really, really good shape. Keeps nice and compact, keeps his chin down, maintaining balance, and he'll throw some really nice quick combinations. So when you're trading with Jojo Diaz, you know, Rakhimov needs to tighten those shoulders, be a bit more compact, and maintain balance, not come in so square on, and obviously maintain good punch technique. So in the exchanges, you know, Rakhimov needs to tighten up a little bit in this fight. And yeah, obviously needs to make those moments count when he's got Diaz stationary in a corner on the ropes or just in the pocket, you know. He needs to make the most of those opportunities. And again, same goes for Rakhimov. He needs to work that body of Jojo Diaz. Again, Jojo Diaz is a guy who can box and move, so working that body could be paramount in regards to slowing him down. If you slow him down, he's going to be in your wheelhouse, and maybe he's got to trade with you, which would give Rakhimov a much better chance in this fight. So ultimately, that's how I believe both guys should play this one. But I have to say, I think this fight is extremely hard to call. One thing I will say, if these guys were exactly the same size, I would pick Jojo Diaz relatively confidently, to be honest. But they're not. Rakhimov is a bigger, stronger dude who's got more punching power. He's more physical. And to me, this fight is purely down to how Jojo Diaz approaches it. If he picks the wrong game plan, he could easily get upset in this fight. And for me, that makes it hard to pick. Again, also bear in mind, while Jojo Diaz can box, he actually enjoys fighting, to be honest. And that's another key to victory for him. You know, he can't afford to get that red mist and try to outmatch Rakhimov in this fight. But, yeah, I find this one extremely, extremely hard to call, I have to say. That's the reason I'm making this video now, because I'm going to keep on deliberating this fight, going back and forth. You know, I find it extremely hard to call. I think the safe bet in this fight would be Jojo Diaz on points, particularly that it's in America. It's on a Golden Boy card. I think Jojo on points is the safe decision. And I have to be honest, I think that's the verdict I'm going to go with. A competitive Jojo Diaz win on points. You know, when I was thinking about this fight the other day, I kind of convinced myself that Rakhimov would win by knockout, that Jojo Diaz would fight the wrong fight, he'd get involved in a war, and he'd get stopped. But, you know, today I'm thinking Jojo Diaz on points, and that's going to be my final pick. But again, I find this fight extremely hard to call, and I'm looking forward to it. Listen, I love these sort of fights. I'm not one of those guys who puts my hat on getting predictions right. To be honest, it doesn't really matter to me all that much. Don't get me wrong, I enjoy getting predictions right, but I've got to be honest, I find this one extremely hard to call, and those sort of fights always make these videos a lot more fun, to be honest. What I will say is this though, one thing I am 99.9% certain on is that this fight is going to be very entertaining. So February 13th, watch this fight, DAZN, brilliant, brilliant fight, looking forward to it. But anyway, it's over to you guys. Who do you believe will win this fight? Are you going with Rakhimov, or are you going with a champion, Jojo Diaz? Share your thoughts below. Peace.